The beginning of the 21st century has seen remarkable displays of self-seeking and corruption, especially in the upper echelons of our institutions. Unfortunately, business hasn't been immune to these disturbing trends. How does one begin to reform hearts, minds, and the structures underlying modern firms and organizations? What could we do differently in order to facilitate the dignity and flourishing of all? Where are good examples to be found, and how can they inspire the next generation to embrace true ethical leadership? I now turn to our first panelist, and that's Dawn Marie Driscoll, the Emeritus Executive Director and Advisory Board Member of the Center for Business Ethics at Bentley. Ms. Driscoll serves as an independent director of DWS Mutual Funds and was elected member of the Board of Governors of the Investment Company Institute, ICI, the National Association of Mutual Funds, serving on the ICI's audit, nominating, and executive committees. Ms. Driscoll also serves as chair of the ICI's Director Service Committee, which advised the Institute regarding issues for independent directors of mutual funds, and then as founding chair of the Independent Directors Council, the National Organization of Mutual Fund Directors. She was formerly a business law partner at Palmer and Dodge in Boston, and she also served for over a decade as vice president of corporate affairs and general counsel of Filene's, the Boston-based department store chair. So there's much more, but I'll end on that note. I loved Filene's. I had very fond memories shopping there. In any event, Dawn, Marie, please take over.
Yeah. The late departed Filene's. I was asked to start with a couple personal reflections about Mike. He talked a lot about trust and integrity and leadership, and he exemplified all those traits. As followers, we trusted him. He was obviously a leader, a pioneer in a field when it was an oxymoron. And he had the highest integrity. Mike, for those of you who know him, know he could not be rushed. If he was serving on a panel, he would talk very slowly so that you make sure you get his points. He couldn't be rushed in filling out the brackets for March Madness either, in the pool we entered every year. I wrote books and articles with him, as all of you did, and whether it was discussing what point we were going to make about Boston University's board or Enron, he would be deliberative to a fault, I thought. Well, let's consider this. Should we say it this way? And we would talk for hours, as I know so many of you did. He liked all of us. He liked a good glass of wine. He liked music. He liked sports. And he loved bliss beyond belief. So we were all so lucky to know him. So I'm going to use some of the work that he and I did together to address the issue of upper echelons, how we reach the hearts and minds, particularly of board members and board structures. Because I believe that organizational scandals at their heart lie at the feet of the governing body. This is not to say that board members are unethical or evil. I think if you look at most scandals, you will find it's the collective action of rational, well-intentioned people who just missed it or didn't pay attention. Let me give you an example from my own career, unfortunately. When I was general counsel of Filene's, I was also in charge of many things, including security. And one day a guy called me and he said, you just arrested my wife for shoplifting. I said, okay. And he said, but she didn't do it. I said, okay. And I said, well, the court will decide. And he said, oh, she's gone to court, and she was found guilty, but she didn't do it. So I said, okay, I'll look into it. Well, to make a long story short, I discovered massive fraud in that store. The security manager was asking his security operators to falsify cases. So we'd go pick up you, charge you with shoplifting. We'd even get employees, take them to court. They'd be found guilty. And, I patted myself on the head and thought, well, I was so smart to uncover that fraud. But then I realized The problem lay at my desk because, I'm embarrassed to say this, I had included in performance measures for security managers number of cases. And worse, we had honored this guy as security manager of the year because, among other things, he had a lot of cases. So I was an upper echelon executive, well-intentioned, but I didn't think it through. So let me reflect on the board level, and I'm going to use 5 of 15 barriers to ethical conduct that Mike and I used over the years. Mary knows them well, because we kept reusing them. And then I'm going to suggest 2 antidotes. So first barrier, NBD. It's no big deal, right? Mike's famous Pinto case. Car has to cost $2,000. To repair the exploding gas tanks would cost another $1. I'm not going to do it. Bridgestone tire. Yeah, the tires are separating in Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. No big deal. Whoops, they're separating in Arizona now. Dow Corning silicone breast implants. When that started, it represented 1% of the company's sales. Ended up going into bankruptcy. So is this an issue of the balance of power in which ethics and compliance officers or general counsels or PR executives come to the board and say, you know, it's no big deal. We've got this covered. It takes courage for a board member to speak up and to challenge something and to be other than the parsley on the fish at a board luncheon, as one executive described board members. Second barrier, start with conclusions. Bottom line, we are going to make our numbers this quarter. How many of you own mutual funds or stock or check the stock market? You all want performance, right? Well, there's a lot of talk in settings like this about the purpose of business being more than just shareholder returns. And you may have some directors who actually believe that. But around the table, their job is to look at shareholder returns. And if they and the upper echelons are starting with the conclusions, we are going to make our numbers this quarter, that drives everything else. Similarly, in the nonprofit world, you're a nonprofit director, we are not going to spend more than X% of our budget on overhead. The rest is going to go for programs. Well, if any of you have read Dan Pallotta, you know that is outmoded thinking today. But I think a lot of directors still believe it. They start with that conclusion. Third barrier, mesmerizing culture. John talks a lot about culture issues. Most board members like their colleagues, and they like the intellectual activity, even if they don't like the work, and I know you've talked about work, the absolutely massive amounts of mind-numbing reading they have to do, and the thought of liability and litigation. Ira Milstein, who's an expert on corporate governance, has said we need more aggressive activist directors. But a lot of directors want to get along, you know, with their colleagues. And the poster child for this, I think, if any of you have read it, is William Power's definitive report on the Enron board. The board failed in its oversight duties. It didn't demand information. It didn't understand financial transactions, and its controls were inadequate. But the board got along. They liked the increasing share price. They liked the positive publicity about Enron until it all blew up and it sank like a stone. Fourth barrier, fragmented information. Silos. Board members listen to presentations on various subjects. You make a presentation, then you do, then you do. But they don't connect the subjects, even though I think the responsibility of board members is really the forest, not the trees. They're listening to a lot of trees. Let's look at the Wells Fargo phony bank account scandal that you all know. Scandal that some people say was 2016. Well, the board knew about it in 2013. because there was an investigative article in the LA Times about phony bank accounts. The CEO of Volkswagen allegedly knew about the emissions fraud, but he didn't tell the U.S. bond investors who rely on bond offering documents for accurate and not misleading information. So what do these upper echelon executives do? They blame the branch bank managers, right? They blame the quality control emissions guys. But they don't put the whole picture together to see the harm to the institution. Last barrier, boiled frog, or groupthink. This is particularly true, I think, if there's an expert on the board, which is why I am totally opposed to having directors chosen by skill set. So the CPA has been on the board a long time, and he thinks everything's fine. So I'm not going to question these off-balance sheet, complex financial transactions, special purpose vehicles that I don't understand, because he says they're okay. The IT professional thinks that our cybersecurity defenses are fine, so I'm not going to push for an outside audit. After all, I'm the woman on the board, so I speak about HR and diversity issues. Everybody goes to get along. There's discussion, but it's not rigorous. After all, board meeting runs late, and we're late for the board dinner already. So how can we motivate directors to do the right thing and to avoid ethical minefields? Here I have 2 suggestions. First, I'd look at structure. When I give ethics talks, I sometimes use 4 words. It's process, not substance. Mike always said, ethical issues are gray, but a good process will give you a good result. Today, I think I would add 3 more words. Process informs culture, especially board culture. In 1999, I was on a national task force of 3 CEOs and 3 independent directors to look at best practices for corporate governance. And we came up with 15 suggestions that were stronger than the Securities and Exchange Commission could have come out with by rulemaking. One of them was to call for executive sessions, which hopefully now is standard practice on all boards, profit or nonprofit. This is where directors, particularly if they have a high candor level and trust with each other, can sit without management and say, I didn't understand that presentation. And what's more, I'm not sure I like the presenter. Or, we just got a little information, or we got no information about what a colleague of mine sent to me an article about this. And is anybody else worried about this? Or am I the only one that's worried about it? And you have a discussion. That's a better process. We all read about the Nissan CEO who was arrested in Japan, right? So last week, a special committee put the fault on the board and said the structure needed to change. It said the board meeting should last longer than 20 minutes. No longer should the CEO have the sole power to determine compensation. A majority of the board should be independent. The chairman should be an independent director. The nominating committee should have real power. Honestly, 20 years after I served on that national committee, I am shocked. Not shock like there's gambling going on in Casablanca, but I'm truly shocked that organizations don't have these kind of best practices today, and I think that's where ethical scandals come out. So last, I would look at motivation, and here I disagree with some of your past panelists, sorry, that said we shouldn't focus on negative stories as motivators for good ethical conduct. For years, I was the director of an insurance company, and we provided liability insurance for directors. And our slogan was, we wrap directors in bubble wrap, so they never have to worry about writing a personal check. But that's not what directors are motivated by. They don't want to see their name in the Wall Street Journal as being a director of an institution that exploded. Even in the nonprofit world, reputations can suffer. Mike and I wrote once about the United Way of America board. big nonprofit, you know, head partner from a big national accounting firm on the board, head of American Express, Sears, CEOs. The executive director was indicted on 25 felony counts and convicted. And so these directors were on the witness stand in federal court being asked, so why didn't you pay attention when you got the anonymous letter about this guy? Well, because they liked him, right? I don't think they signed up for that nonprofit board wanting their reputation ruined. So when I talk to ethics and compliance officers and they go before the board, I say, listen, here's what I would do. I would bring in negative stories. And I would say, you probably read this story in the Wall Street Journal last week. Let me give you my opinion as to what went wrong and what the board could have done differently. And they pay attention. So today, I would use the story of Pacific Gas and Electric if I were making a presentation to a board. And I would say, you've probably read about Pacific Gas and Electric. Negligent in 2010 for natural gas explosion, faced criminal indictments. 17 of 21 fires in 2017 caused by its equipment. Regulators issued a 300-page damning report about its safety culture. Company faces $30 billion in losses. Due to last year's fire, 85 people killed, 18,000 structures gone. Stock price plummeted 88% in a year. Now it's bankrupt, CEO's out. But the board knew that its nearly 100-year-old transmission lines needed repair. They told the regulators in 2013 they'd repair them. They never did it. They never had any kind of record-keeping systems to find out where its bad lines were, lacked performance data, yet it gave out $4.5 billion in dividends to shareholders, and it spent millions on lobbying state officials. You probably saw 2 days ago the federal judge says, that's overseeing it, said you cannot give out any more dividends. Yesterday, got a new CEO and 10 new board members. Everything that went on at Pacific Gas and Electric, I think, lies at the feet of the board that made financial decisions, capital resource decisions, ignored a bad safety culture. I would love to know what the culture of that former board was. Mike, I wish we were still writing today together. There's so much he would have wanted to think about and write about, not what happened, but why it happened, and why presumably ethical upper echelon people were caught unawares. Thank you.